Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're going to take you somewhere unexpected, a place you probably didn't imagine when thinking about ancient Rome. Picture this: the marbled halls of power, the Senate floor gleaming in the morning light, senators draped in pristine togas. And what's the first big debate of the day? Taxes? War? No. Tonight, it's something far more peculiar: bathroom etiquette. Yes, you heard that right. The men who shaped empires once squabbled about how to behave in public toilets. You might be surprised to hear this story, because history often skips the ordinary, and yet these are the details that make the past feel alive. The truth is, behind Rome's glory, its bustling aqueducts, and its armies, there were moments like this: trivial, funny, and wonderfully human. So, before you get cozy and drift off to sleep, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to support us. Now, turn off the lights, close your eyes, relax your body, focus on the story, and enjoy the ride tonight. You shuffle into the marble corridors of the Roman Senate, sandals tapping lightly against the smooth stone. The air smells faintly of oil lamps and beeswax, mixed with the sharp tang of ink drying on scrolls. It's a morning like any other in the heart of the empire, except for the topic waiting behind those towering doors. Inside, the senators are already gathering. Their togas swirl like white waves as they settle onto the curving benches. Voices overlap in a low hum, punctuated by the occasional cough or the thud of a sandal. Scrolls crackle open. Signet rings tap on wooden desks. The great room smells faintly of olive oil and ambition. But the whispers aren't about Gaul, or about the treasury, or even about who offended whom at last night's feast. No. The word making the rounds today is latrine, the public toilets. Some poor scribe probably thought he misheard when the session agenda was announced, on the decorum of shared sanitation. You can almost hear the chuckles ripple through the hall. Imagine the most powerful men in the known world, draped in silk-edged togas, standing in a hall lined with marble statues. And they're about to spend the morning discussing bathroom rules. It's as if the modern United Nations decided to dedicate a day to arguing about elevator small talk. The presiding magistrate clears his throat. The room hushes, save for a faint squeak of leather soles. A scribe dips his stylus into ink, ready to record history's strangest Senate decree. And then, the floor opens to debate. First to rise is Senator Quintus Valerius, his toga draped just so, his posture regal, his face deadly serious. He begins with a flourish, his voice echoing under the coffered ceiling. Honorable colleagues, Rome is great, not because of conquest alone, but because of order. Order in law, order in roads, and yes, even in necessary places. The phrase hangs in the air. Necessary places, the polite Roman euphemism for toilets. A few senators snort. One coughs to hide a laugh. Quintus presses on, undeterred. For too long, he declares, our public facilities have lacked the dignity befitting Roman citizens. There are those who linger too long upon the bench. There are those who sing while relieving themselves. There are even those, he pauses dramatically, who leave the sponge unwashed. You can practically feel the temperature in the room rise, not from anger, but from suppressed laughter. Imagine these men, veterans of battle, wranglers of law, now staring solemnly at one another as they contemplate the horrors of an improperly cleaned tersorium. Someone in the back mutters. Perhaps he speaks from personal grievance. A ripple of amusement runs through the chamber. But Quintus is not here for jokes. He unfurls a scroll, reading what appears to be a formal proposal. Rules for conduct in the public latrines. Now, let's pause and savor this image. The Roman Senate, that august body of statesmen listening intently to regulations about who may sit where, whether humming is allowed, and how to rotate the shared sponge bucket for maximum fairness. Historians are still debating whether this was a genuine attempt at reform or a satirical jab at overly fussy aristocrats. And yet, Rome was nothing if not practical. Public toilets were a reality for everyone, even the elite. Imagine rows of stone benches, 30 seats or more, with circular openings cut neatly along the top. Underneath, fresh water from aqueducts flowed constantly, carrying waste away to the Cloaca Maxima, the city's vast sewer system. Beside each bench sat the infamous vinegar jar for rinsing the sponge, a communal cleaning tool that was, shall we say, less than ideal by modern standards. Picture it. No partitions, no privacy, just the sound of sandals scraping on stone and the murmur of conversation as senators, merchants, and commoners alike did their business. If you're imagining marble luxury, you're partly right. Roman toilets were architectural wonders, but the social awkwardness, that was timeless. Back in the Senate, a younger man, Publius Cornelius, leaps up, eager to make his mark. "Honored fathers," he says, "this is no trivial matter. What separates us from barbarians is not the sword, but civility." His voice rises as he proclaims, "If we cannot maintain decorum in the latrine, how can we expect to govern the provinces?" Now that's a leap in logic, if ever there was one. But the room hums with approval, or perhaps just amusement. Someone whispers, "Next he'll propose incense burners." Someone else mutters, "Don't give him ideas." As the debate unfolds, you picture senators pounding their fists about toilet time limits, while others counter that to rush nature is to insult the gods. You can almost see the faces redden, the gestures grow wild, toga folds flapping as men who once commanded legions now argue about, well, let's call it flow control. And somewhere in the shadows, a bored scribe wonders how he'll phrase this in the official records without sounding ridiculous. Maybe something lofty on the harmonization of civic ritual spaces. Sounds much better than how not to be annoying in the bathroom. Hours pass. The sunlight slants through the high windows. Dust motes float lazily in the warm air. And still, the debate rages on, swelling like the Tiber in flood season. For you, though, it's a strangely soothing picture, because even in the grandeur of Rome, people cared about the same little things we do: space, sound, and cleanliness. So next time someone says history is all battles and dates, you'll remember this. Once upon a time, the future of bathroom etiquette was the hottest topic in the most powerful room in the world. And that, somehow, makes Rome feel a little closer. You linger in that marble hall a little longer, letting the voices of senators wash over you, like waves lapping against stone. The debate has taken a strange turn, away from lofty principles and toward the gritty details of daily life. One senator, Lucius Fabius, leans forward, his face flushed with the passion of a man on a mission. He raises his hand for silence and says in tones of grave concern, "Colleagues, this is not mere trifling. Do you not see the chaos in our latrines? The whisperings, the laughter, the noises?" Ah, yes, the noises. It's here that the debate veers into territory that would make a modern talk show blush. Apparently, some senators find the natural acoustics of marble chambers less than ideal. There have been complaints, formal ones, about echoes, about hums, about those faint, embarrassing sounds that tend to accompany nature's call. You picture it now. A line of stone benches, all in a row, with senators sitting side by side in an unspoken truce. No walls, no curtains, just 30 pairs of sandaled feet swinging gently as men discuss philosophy, or, apparently, argue about whether it's proper to hum to cover the noise. One old patrician, his toga as immaculate as his pride, declares, "It is unseemly to sing in the latrine. This is not a theater." His voice booms so loudly it almost proves his point about acoustics. But a younger senator, cheeky, with a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth, counters, "If a tune brings comfort, why should we forbid it? Better humming than awkward silence." His remark draws a few chuckles, and for a moment the Senate floor resembles a schoolyard. Historians are still debating whether these accounts were exaggerated by satirists. But the complaints about sound weren't entirely absurd. Roman public toilets were open, communal, and built of materials that amplified every little noise. Imagine hard marble benches, vaulted ceilings, and flowing water channels beneath your feet. Now, imagine trying to maintain an air of senatorial dignity as every echo reminds the room that you're, well, human. You walk through the scene in your mind. The latrine, tiled in gleaming stone, lit by the pale shafts of daylight slipping through high windows. The air smells faintly of vinegar from the rinsing jars, mixed with something earthier that no amount of ventilation can quite banish. A row of circular holes cut into a smooth slab, each perfectly spaced, each cold as a January morning. There are no doors, no stalls, only the comfort of shared experience, and maybe the odd fragment of conversation about politics, gladiator games, or, on particularly bold days, the latest gossip from the Palatine Hill. One scholar once joked that Roman bathrooms were the original social network. Here, alliances could be formed, favors whispered, insults delivered in hushed tones. You could enter with one opinion and leave having promised support for a grain bill, just because the man next to you shared his sponge etiquette tip. And yet, for all their practicality, these places could also feel like an ambush. What if you sat down beside an enemy? What if your rival decided that this was the perfect time to bring up that loan you forgot to repay? Or worse, what if someone started humming your least favorite tune while you were mid-relief? As Lucius continues his tirade, he suggests that perhaps background music could solve the problem. A lyre in the corner, perhaps a flute player, softly, discreetly, he proposes, as if the addition of live musicians in the bathroom is the most natural solution in the world. You stifle a laugh because the idea is so absurdly elegant, so Roman in its grandeur. If there's a problem, throw art at it. Who knows? Maybe this was the seed of modern elevator music, a soothing soundtrack to disguise life's more awkward sounds. Other senators are horrified. A flute in the latrine? Next, you'll suggest incense burners, one scoffs. Another mutters about moral decay and how this obsession with comfort will soften Roman virtue. You can almost see him wagging a finger as if scented air is the first step toward barbarism. The argument grows lively, hands slicing the air, toga folds flaring like sails in a storm. A few scribes exchange weary glances, their wax tablets filling with phrases they can scarcely believe they're writing. Discussion on melodic accompaniment to defecation, motion tabled for further review. Somewhere in the archives, those words may still lie, buried like a secret joke from the past. The sound debate does more than amuse. It reveals something about Rome itself. This was a society obsessed with appearances, even in the most private moments. The senators wanted dignity to follow them everywhere, even onto the cold stone bench. And yet, they were human. They laughed, they complained, they improvised. You can almost hear the younger ones whispering, "What's next? A toga code for bathroom visits?" You smile in the dark because it's all so familiar. Swap the marble hall for a modern boardroom, and it's not so different. Powerful people arguing over trivial inconveniences, convinced they're shaping the destiny of civilization. Maybe they were, in their way. As the session drifts on, the debate softens into murmurs. Some senators lean back, fingers tapping against scrolls, eyes glazing as if imagining a world where bathroom visits come with harp music. Outside, the city hums, vendors calling out on the streets, the smell of baking bread drifting through open courtyards, the distant clatter of hooves on stone. Life goes on, even as the Senate dreams of perfect silence in its public toilets. You take a deep breath, settling into that image. The great Roman Empire, so mighty, so majestic. And yet, at this very moment, utterly preoccupied with acoustics. Somehow, that makes history feel softer, warmer, closer to home. The room stirs again, sandals scuffing against the floor as a new voice rises above the murmurs. It's Marcus Attilius, a senator known more for his fondness for philosophy than practical lawmaking. He smooths his toga with exaggerated care before speaking, as if even his folds should reflect his argument's gravity. "Honored fathers," he begins, his tone dripping with solemnity, "if Rome is to endure, then dignity must be observed, not only in the forum, not only in the curia, but in every space where citizens gather. Even, yes, in those places where nature calls. The choice of words, where nature calls, sparks a ripple of laughter through the chamber. Someone coughs loudly to hide a chuckle. Another mutters under his breath, "Nature seems rather loud these days." But Marcus presses on, his voice booming as if he were declaiming from a marble podium to a crowd of thousands. "We must consider legislation, a formal code, a scroll to govern conduct in the necessary places." And there it is, the bold suggestion historians still puzzle over. Was Marcus serious? Was this performance? Or was this entire debate a kind of senatorial theater, a parody of their own obsession with rules? No one knows for certain, but in that moment, you can feel the tension in the room sharpen like a spearhead. Imagine the scroll he envisions, written in neat Latin script, bearing commands such as "sit in silence," "cleanse the sponge," "yield thy seat in timely fashion." A code of courtesy carved into law, elevating bathroom behavior to the level of civic virtue. The chamber grows restless. Some senators nod gravely, Others shake their heads, mouths twisting into smirks. You picture one man in the back, leaning toward his neighbor to whisper, "What's next? A fine for humming? A tax on lingering?" His neighbor snorts softly, his shoulders quivering with suppressed laughter. And yet, beneath the humor, you sense a flicker of sincerity. Rome prized order in everything: streets, aqueducts, the army's rigid hierarchy. Why not extend that discipline to the latrine? In their minds, even a sponge soaked in vinegar belonged to the great architecture of Roman civilization. Here's the strange truth that makes you pause. Roman public toilets weren't just functional. They were communal, social, almost ritualistic. Imagine stepping into a chamber lined with gleaming marble benches, each pierced by perfectly round openings. Beneath, a steady stream of water gurgles, whisking waste away toward the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer that beats like a hidden artery beneath the city. There are no partitions, no screens, just an open sweep of stone and the faint smell of vinegar wafting from a shared jar. The rinse for the tersorium, that humble sponge affixed to a stick. You can almost feel the coolness of the bench beneath you, the echo of footsteps as new arrivals enter, the soft drip of water in the trough. The light slants in through narrow windows, painting gold stripes on the floor. Conversations drift lazily from end to end. Snatches of gossip about a charioteer's latest victory, a senator's new villa, whispers about tax reforms. The latrine isn't just a convenience, it's a stage for the daily theater of Roman life, and that's precisely what fuels Marcus's passion. Consider, he says, voice rising again, how often the matters of state are whispered in these halls of necessity. Should we not guard these spaces as jealously as the forum? If our conversations are polluted by impropriety, what becomes of Rome? The irony doesn't escape you. He's arguing for political hygiene in a place defined by physical hygiene. Yet the sentiment hits home with some senators. A few even clap their hands against their knees, murmuring assent. Others, of course, roll their eyes so hard you can practically hear it. From the back, an older senator, grizzled, weary, his toga as rumpled as his patience, finally mutters, "By Jupiter, if the Republic survived Sulla and Caesar, it can survive a little humming." A ripple of laughter breaks out like a gust of wind through dry leaves. But Marcus is undeterred. He insists on drafting an official bathroom decorum law. His hand gestures become grand. His toga flares like a white sail. For a fleeting second, you picture the scroll itself, sealed with wax, stored in some archive, lying dormant for centuries until a future archaeologist stumbles upon the words Lex Latrina, the law of the toilet. Historians still debate whether such a law ever existed, but the very idea gives you pause. Because in that moment, it's clear the men who conquered the Mediterranean also cared deeply about what happened on a cold stone bench. And there's something almost tender in that thought, isn't there? That even the mighty Romans had their little worries, their pet peeves, their desperate attempts to make the awkward a little less awkward. That while emperors plotted campaigns and legions marched across continents, someone in the Senate once raised his voice to demand, "Let us not linger too long on the latrine." The day stretches on. Outside, the hum of the city grows louder, the clop of hooves on paving stones, the hawker's cry of fresh olives, the forum bustles as statues glint in the sun. And inside, in the cool marble chamber, the great debate over bathroom etiquette presses forward like a slow-moving tide. You take a breath, sink deeper into the cushions, and let the image settle. Togas swishing, scrolls rustling, voices rising in a space where history's grand theater shrinks to something small, human, and oddly comforting. Time seems to flow differently in the Senate chamber, much like the water beneath Rome's toilets, steady, unhurried, but relentless. You shift slightly in your mind's seat, feeling the weight of the day begin to press down, not from the gravity of war or economics, but from something stranger, perhaps even stickier, the sponge problem. Yes, the tersorium has entered the debate. A new senator stands now, Gaius Cassius Severus, his brow furrowed in moral outrage, his voice sharp enough to slice olives. "It is an affront to Roman values," he cries, "that a man should wipe himself with the same implement used by another without knowing whose posterior last graced the stick." You can practically hear someone mutter, "Posterior? What a poet." Cassius raises a wooden object in the air, a prop, a replica of a tersorium, no doubt crafted just for this moment. The senators gasp. One actually recoils. Another leans in, inspecting the object with the curiosity of someone trying to decide whether it's a tool, a weapon, or a very unfortunate toothbrush. Cassius slams it on his podium. Gently, of course. It's still a sponge. This horror, this shared indignity must be addressed. And so begins the most passionate portion of the day's debate. Communal hygiene. You picture the sponge in question, mounted on a stick, soaked in vinegar water between uses, sitting patiently in a trough at the foot of each bench. No soap, no personal wipes. Just one moist, questionable answer to a question no one wanted to ask. You'd think this topic would be taboo, but for the Romans, it was simply practical. Sanitation wasn't just a personal issue, it was civic. Public facilities were just that, public. And while the tersorium was never exactly beloved, it was common, expected, part of the rhythm of daily life, like buying bread or complaining about taxes. But now, in the high chamber of Roman politics, the sponge becomes a symbol. Some argue for personal responsibility. "Let every man bring his own sponge," cries one. "Let them mark them with initials," adds another helpfully. You imagine the sight. Roman citizens strolling through the streets with decorative sponge carriers strapped to their belts. A strange new fashion trend. Spring 28 BCE, now in lavender. Others scoff at the idea. "Should we carry our own amphoria vinegar too?" A plump senator jokes. "Why not our own benches while we're at it?" The room bursts into light laughter. Historians still debate how common tersorium usage really was, and whether vinegar truly sanitized anything at all. Some evidence suggests that frequent users of public latrines often suffered from infections, but that didn't stop the sponge from remaining a staple of Roman bathrooms for centuries. Back in the chamber, the real question takes shape. Who is responsible for hygiene in shared spaces? Cassius wants the state to fund daily sponge replacement. He even proposes an inspector, a man whose sole job is to monitor latrine cleanliness. His title? Praefectus Spongii. You bite back a laugh at the thought. Imagine applying for that job. A crisp toga, a government seal, and a daily checklist that includes inspect sponge rack number 6. The chamber roars with debate. Some call it an outrageous waste of public funds. Others argue it's the pinnacle of civilization. We conquered Carthage, Can we not conquer filth? Money becomes the sticking point. Always does. Rome's finances, though vast, are never endless. Grain imports, aqueduct repairs, gladiator games. There's only so much room in the treasury. And some senators argue that sponge maintenance shouldn't compete with, say, feeding the people. But Cassius is determined. Cleanliness, he intones, is the measure of our moral character. You imagine the look on a common citizen's face upon hearing this. Scrubbing clothes in the river, dodging chamber pots dumped from windows, and now being told that sponge care equals patriotism. Even in ancient Rome, politics had a way of elevating the ridiculous into a noble cause. Still, the debate touches on something deeper: how a society defines shared responsibility. Who pays for clean public spaces? Who enforces standards? And how far does civility extend before it becomes absurdity? The senators begin to divide. On one side, the pragmatists, arguing for personal sponges, simple solutions, and fewer expenses. On the other, the idealists, demanding official oversight, sponge audits, and national hygiene pride. One senator even proposes a law mandating that each latrine display a sponge usage chart, complete with names and timestamps. Accountability, he explains, is the path to progress. Another snickers. Yes, let's name and shame the lingerers too. The argument spirals like a scroll unraveling down a staircase. What started as sanitation policy becomes philosophical. Can one truly be free if one is forced to share a moist sponge? Is communal cleanliness a civic burden or a gift? You sink deeper into the mental marble bench, letting the voices wash over you. The drama of empire, reduced to sponge rotation. But you feel the heartbeat of history here. Not the thundering march of legions or the clash of swords, but the quieter, stranger debates that show us who people really were. What annoyed them, what embarrassed them, what they were willing to argue over while wearing ceremonial sandals. And somewhere outside the chamber, a real tersorium sits in vinegar water, waiting patiently for its next user. Unaware, it's the star of Rome's newest political storm. The debate, like the Tiber in flood season, shows no sign of slowing. The air inside the Senate chamber has grown thick, not with incense, as some wish, but with the heat of arguments bouncing from one column to another. Outside, the midday sun casts sharp shadows on marble floors. But inside, the senators cast even sharper words. Today's question, dear listener, is one that philosophers would never dare to frame so plainly. Should privacy exist in the necessary places? You picture it, the long line of latrine benches, gleaming under shafts of filtered light, holes cut into stone, no barriers, no curtains. Romans prided themselves on communal living, but when nature called, did every man truly wish to answer in company? Senator Aulus Plautius rises, adjusting his toga like a man about to pronounce the fate of provinces. His voice booms, echoing against the marble vault. Rome is great because Rome is united. We dine together, we bathe together, we fight together. Shall we now splinter apart in the latrine like selfish Greeks? The jab at the Greeks, masters of philosophy, lovers of privacy, elicits murmurs. A few senators nod vigorously. Others exchange sly grins, because some of them have visited Athens and quietly admired those modest partitions. Aulus continues, waving a scroll as if it were a sword. Let the benches remain open, as they have for centuries. A true Roman has nothing to hide, not in battle, not in the bath, not even when answering nature's call. It's a stirring declaration. But from the back rises another voice, smooth, controlled, tinged with irony. It belongs to Titus Flavius, younger and far less convinced by the gospel of communal everything. Honored fathers, Titus begins, is modesty now treason? Are we to declare war on curtains? Will the man who shields his dignity next be accused of plotting against the state? Laughter ripples through the chamber, muffled behind hands. Titus presses on. We legislate on everything, from the height of sandals to the shape of aqueduct arches. Can we not, in our wisdom, legislate a screen for the modest among us? Now, the Senate hums like a hive disturbed. Some cry barbaric at the notion of partitions. Others murmur agreement, imagining a more discreet experience. You can almost feel the chamber divide into two camps, Team Open Bench and Team Privacy Curtain. Historians still debate the real outcome of this clash, but evidence suggests that privacy in Roman latrines remained minimal, if not non-existent, for most citizens. Why? Perhaps practicality. Walls cost money. Curtains require upkeep. And Rome, for all her grandeur, thrived on shared spaces. The bathhouse, the forum, the theater, even the necessary rooms. Yet, you can't help but imagine what privacy might have changed. Would senators have spoken as freely in the latrine if a curtain shielded their faces? Would conspiracies have blossomed or withered? After all, history tells us that whispers in these echoing chambers often swayed laws, toppled careers, even sparked revolts. Back in the debate, the arguments grow colorful. One senator declares, if a man cannot share a bench, how can he share the burden of empire? Another snaps, I will share the empire, but not my elbow space. The chamber erupts in laughter, and beneath the humor lies a truth. Roman identity was built on togetherness. Public life spilled into every corner. To be Roman was to belong, visibly and constantly, even in moments most of us would deem private. You let the image settle. A row of senators, side by side on cold stone, sandals dangling, togas draped, voices low as they plot grain shipments or debate sponge rotation, all while the water murmurs softly below. It's strange, almost poetic. There's no pretense here, no room for grandeur, just men being men, trying to blend necessity with dignity. As the argument ebbs, a compromise seems to drift like a cautious raft. No partitions, but perhaps some spacing, a little extra stone between seats, a gesture toward comfort without surrendering the Roman ideal of openness. No one claps, but several heads nod. Progress, like plumbing, often moves slowly. Outside, the sky glows amber, the smell of fresh bread and olive oil rising from the streets. A vendor shouts about figs, a child laughs as a dog chases a rag ball, and here, in this solemn hall, grown men exhale after hours of discourse about benches, curtains, and the philosophical weight of shared silence. You sink deeper into that thought, letting it lull you. Even the greatest empire was knit together, not just by legions and laws, but by simple, shared spaces. Rome's glory wasn't only marble temples. It was also the echo of conversation in a room without walls. And maybe, just maybe, that's why they left it that way. The debate had drifted into quieter waters, or so it seemed. The murmurs softened, toga folds ceased their agitated flapping, and for a heartbeat the chamber felt calm. But then, like a pebble tossed into a still pool, a single phrase shattered the fragile peace. The sponge-sharing dilemma remains unresolved. The voice belonged to Decimus Junius Silenus, a senator with the kind of voice that could hush a crowd without raising so much as an eyebrow. He stood slowly, letting the silence swell before he spoke again. Rome prides itself on order, and yet, in our most intimate moments, we rely on chaos. One sponge for all, passed from hand to hand, from seat to seat. The words hang heavy, as if coated in vinegar themselves. A few men wince, others grimace and glance at their neighbors, their imaginations painting pictures they'd rather scrub away. You picture it clearly. A row of stone benches, each hole smooth from years of use, the trough gurgling faintly at the foot of the seats. In that trough rests the communal sponge stick, the tersorium, waiting. Patient, damp, suspiciously damp. Romans were practical to the bone, but practicality has its limits. And here, in this chamber of marble and ego, practicality had collided with pride. Is vinegar truly enough? Decimus continues, his voice low but insistent. Does a single rinse cleanse not only the sponge, but the soul of Rome? Or shall we do what no other people dares? Set a new standard for hygiene. Historians are still debating whether this was a genuine health concern or a bid for political attention. Evidence of parasites and infections suggests that vinegar's cleansing power was, shall we say, optimistic at best. But to admit this was to admit that Rome, mighty Rome, could be undone by something as humble as a sponge. A hand shoots up across the hall. It's Quintus Valerius again, toga flaring like a battle flag. "Let every citizen bring his own sponge," he declares, puffing his chest like a rooster. "Let him wear it proudly upon his belt, so all know he is prepared." The image is almost too vivid. Roman streets filled with men swaggering about, sponges dangling like trophies. Fashion meet function. Another senator, dry as the Sahara, mutters, "Yes, and let us embroider their family crests upon them, lest anyone mistake one patrician sponge for another's." The chamber erupts in laughter, a sound as bright and sudden as sunlight on marble. Even the scribes crack smiles, though their styluses keep scratching, etching this absurdity into history. But beneath the humor lurks a serious question. If shared tools spread disease, and they did, should Rome change its ways? The debate spirals like ivy on a column. Some cry for personal responsibility, bring your own. Others insist on civic duty. The state must provide. Cassius, the hygiene crusader from earlier, leaps back into the fray. Do we not fund aqueducts to carry water? Do we not pave roads for all to tread? Then why, in Jupiter's name, can we not fund sponges for every latrine in the empire? His words echo with such drama, you almost expect someone to burst into applause. Instead, a weary voice from the rear sighs, "Next, he'll propose gilded sponges for senators." A murmur of amusement ripples through the chamber, but Cassius presses on, undeterred. He even floats the notion of colored sponges, different hues for different ranks, like the stripes on a toga. Purple for the elite, perhaps. Red for the equestrians. The idea lands with a thud heavy enough to shake the wax from the scribe's tablets. Still, imagine it for a moment. Rows of sponges in patriotic colors, dangling like festive garlands across Rome's most utilitarian spaces. The day's light wanes as the arguments churn. A few senators glance toward the door, longing for fresh air, or perhaps a quick escape to the very facilities they're legislating. But the debate clings like damp wool. You let the scene blur into softness. Marble floors, glowing in golden dusk, the voices fading to murmurs, the endless push and pull between order and absurdity. Because here's the truth. The sponge is more than a stick with bristles. It's a mirror, reflecting Rome's struggle to balance grandeur with grit, hygiene with hubris. And as the discussion limps toward an uneasy truce, you sense the question will linger far longer than any senator's speech. Should a civilization that built the Colosseum really be undone by a humble, soggy sponge? Outside, the city breathes. The Tiber glimmers under a sky brushed with rose. Vendors pack their stalls. Somewhere, in a dim latrine, a tersorium soaks silently in its vinegar bath, waiting for the next hand, the next argument, the next empire of germs. You settle deeper into that thought, letting its gentle absurdity lull you. Even the greatest of men were haunted by the smallest of details. And somehow, that makes history tender, almost soothing. As twilight creeps through the high windows of the Senate chamber, the debate pivots, almost imperceptibly, from hygiene to economics. Because in Rome, everything eventually comes down to money. It starts with Senator Servius Cornelius, a man whose toga always seems to have just the right amount of starch and whose fingers glitter with rings that say, "I care deeply about fiscal responsibility," and also about being fabulous. He rises slowly, adjusts his folds, and lets the murmurs die before speaking. "Honorable fathers," he begins, voice calm as still water, "if Rome is to fund sponges, vinegar, and, Jupiter help us, perhaps even colored ranks of cleansing implements, then we must ask the question, who will pay?" The room stills. The laughter from earlier dies down, replaced by the soft shuffle of sandals. And then it begins, low murmurs swelling like a storm tide. "Not the treasury," someone blurts. "Why not?" "The baths are funded," another snaps back. "Ah yes, the treasury. A beast as temperamental as any lion in the arena." Rome's finances in this era were stretched thin. Grain imports devoured silver like a hungry hydra. Gladiator games demanded gold by the cartload. Aqueduct repairs bled the coffers. And now, toilet sponges? Servius raises a finger, his face set in solemn lines. The people already cry for cheaper bread. Shall we tell them, "Your loaves cost more, but your bottoms are cleaner"? A ripple of nervous laughter stirs the chamber. You can almost hear the scribe in the corner muttering, "May Jupiter strike me if I ever forget this sentence." The senators fall into factions again. Team public purse. Hygiene is health. Health is strength. Strength is empire. Team private sponge. A man must care for his own dignity and his own stick. One elderly senator, his voice trembling but fierce, rises to deliver the ultimate sarcasm. "Next you'll propose a sponge tax. Shall we engrave sponges with the emperor's profile and mint them as currency?" The chamber erupts. Laughter bounces off the marble vault like coins on a temple floor. Even the scribes chuckle openly, though their styluses scratch on dutifully, recording this absurdity for posterity. But wait, someone takes it seriously. You blink in disbelief as Marcus Attilius, yes, our grand orator from earlier, leaps up and declares, "Why not? A sponge levy, a small tax for the maintenance of public dignity. What higher cause than purity?" You can almost hear the collective groan. Imagine it, tax collectors fanning across the empire, demanding a fee for sponge upkeep. Merchants muttering curses in Gaul, farmers scratching their heads in Hispania, legionnaires grumbling over their meager stipends. All for what? A damp stick. Still, the idea gains a few nods. After all, Rome had taxed everything else: salt, slaves, even urine. Yes, Emperor Vespasian would later tax urine collected for tanning leather, turning waste into revenue. The senators knew well, where there is waste, there is profit. Historians still debate whether such a sponge fund ever materialized, but the principle lingered. Public convenience carried public cost. And in Rome, cost meant politics. You picture the scene as the sun sinks lower, casting honeyed light on marble walls streaked with shadow. The debate grows more philosophical. Is sanitation a right? One senator intones. Or a privilege? Neither, another retorts. It is a duty, like paying tribute to the gods. The words echo, lofty and absurd all at once. Men who governed provinces, commanded legions, now sparring over sponges as though the fate of the empire balanced on vinegar and bristles. And maybe, in some tiny way, it did. Rome's greatness was built not just on roads and armies, but on order. Rules for everything, from marriage laws to sewer flow. Why not rules for latrine funding? As dusk deepens, servants glide in with oil lamps. The glow pools on the polished floor, soft and golden, painting the senators' faces in warm relief. Outside, the city hums with evening life, the scent of roasting lamb drifting from taverns, the clatter of dice in alleyways, the faint strains of a flute wafting from a balcony. Inside, the voices mellow into weary compromise. No tax, for now. No state-funded sponge fund. But an agreement, unspoken yet understood, that something must be done. Perhaps more vinegar. Perhaps a rotating duty for maintenance. Perhaps nothing at all, beyond more speeches tomorrow. And as the senators file out, sandals whispering on marble, you can almost hear their thoughts. We have conquered Carthage, bridged the Rhine, bent the world to our will. And still, we cannot decide who pays for the sponge. The image lingers like candle smoke, delicate and absurd. The empire of marble and might, tripping over a stick wrapped in wool. And somehow, that thought makes history not just boring, but beautifully human. The chamber, emptied of senators, hums faintly with echoes of their arguments, like whispers lingering on cool marble long after the voices have gone. But don't drift away yet, because this story is about to turn deliciously petty. You see, in Rome, power didn't just move in the forum or the battlefield. It flowed like water in the strangest places, including, yes, the latrine. Public toilets were more than practical necessities. They were political theaters, places where alliances formed and enemies were quietly gutted with words. You imagine stepping into one of these spaces. the low murmur of voices, the hollow sound of sandals scraping on stone, the rhythmic gurgle of water running beneath the benches. The smell of vinegar hangs sharp in the air, a poor disguise for everything else. And then you notice it, the posture of men as they sit. Two senators leaning close, heads bent, whispering with the intensity of conspirators. Another perched stiffly, face carved into marble disdain, his eyes flicking like daggers toward a rival just 3 seats away. Historians are still debating the true extent of this toilet diplomacy, but graffiti on latrine walls hints at its reality. Names scratched alongside crude drawings, mocking rivals, praising allies, or just venting frustrations. One scholar even calls the latrine the social network of the empire. Picture it. Julius Caesar himself might have passed through these very halls of necessity, nodding to a fellow patrician, exchanging a few clipped words, perhaps the seeds of policy or treachery or both. And here's the twist. Some senators actually argued that the informality of these spaces threatened the dignity of Rome. Decisions, one man thundered during today's debate, should be forged in the curia, not whispered on the sponge bench. But others defended the practice. What better place, countered another, to speak candidly than where men are stripped of pomp and pretense? The line drew laughter, but it also struck a chord. The latrine was an equalizer. A senator in full toga looked much like anyone else when perched on a stone seat, sandals dangling, his dignity pooling on the floor like yesterday's wine. And that, perhaps, was the real problem: proximity. These men could stomach rivals in the Senate, separated by scrolls and protocol, but elbow to elbow in a toilet? That was another matter. Imagine the awkward choreography. One man finishing his business, rising with a rustle of wool, passing the sponge stick, oh, the eternal sponge, to the next, all while murmuring about grain tariffs or the latest scandal in the provinces. A subtle sneer, a two-pointed remark. In that compressed space, tension fermented faster than amphora wine. You recall one story, a rumor passed down through satirical verses, about a senator who supposedly learned of a plot against him while seated in the latrine. A whisper, half drowned by the sound of water, warning him not to attend a certain dinner. He feigned ignorance, finished his business, and lived to see another day. True or not, the tale lingers because it feels possible. The latrine was that strange stage where history's big wheels spun on the smallest of pivots. And so, as the Senate wrangled over curtains, sponges, and soundproofing, a quieter fear pulsed beneath the marble surface. Information. Too much flowed in these open spaces. Secrets leaked faster than water through a cracked aqueduct. Historians still puzzle over this paradox. Rome built an empire on connectivity. Roads, aqueducts, laws. But sometimes, connection was a curse. In the latrine, connection meant exposure. Exposure of words, of glances, of ambitions too raw for daylight. You let the picture settle. A world-class empire, obsessed with order, yet conducting its dirtiest politics in the humblest of rooms. Outside, the city glows under the velvet spread of dusk. Torches sputter to life in alleyways. Bakers pull the last loaves from wood-fired ovens, their crusts snapping in the cool night air. From a tavern, laughter spills like cheap wine. Rome hums, oblivious to the day's debate about toilet manners. But inside your mind, the senators linger like ghosts. You see them hunched together, their voices low, their sandals damp with a hint of vinegar water mist. The sponge dips, the whispers coil like smoke, and there, on the edge of absurdity and ambition, history tiptoes forward. So the next time someone says power is glamorous, remember this. In Rome, the fate of fortunes, and perhaps of men, sometimes rested on a stone bench, beneath a roof that smelled faintly of vinegar and empire. The Senate reconvenes the next morning, under a sky the color of hammered bronze, the air thick with the scent of early baking bread and distant olive oil fires. The topic? Still bathrooms, still etiquette, still somehow the sponge. But today, the conversation smells faintly sweeter, thanks to the latest and most fragrant proposal yet. A senator named Manius Acilius, wealthy, theatrical, with a nose that could detect a fig merchant 2 streets away, strides into the chamber and begins with this proclamation. Honored fathers, Rome stinks. You could hear a fig drop in the silence that follows. A few jaws slacken, others twist in disbelief. Rome stinks? The city of marble, of triumphal arches, of gods and glory? Manius presses on, unfazed by their shock. Yes, he thunders, pacing now, toga billowing like the mainsail of a trireme. Our streets stink, our alleys stink, and most grievously, our latrines stink. How can we claim dominion over the known world while choking on the fumes of our own neglect? Gasps, murmurs, a stifled laugh. Somewhere, a scribe scratches furiously, perhaps wondering whether to add an exclamation mark. And then Manius unveils his solution with the flourish of a stage magician. Incense burners. Picture it. Gleaming bronze censers swinging gently from the vaulted ceilings of public toilets, perfuming the air with frankincense, myrrh, perhaps even a dash of imported cinnamon for that extra touch of empire. It is not decadence, Manius insists, sensing resistance before it rises. It is dignity. Should our citizens not breathe sweet air as they answer nature's call? Should senators not deliberate in peace, free from the tyranny of foul odor? The words hang, heavy as incense smoke. And then it begins. One senator leaps to his feet, purple stripe quivering with indignation. Luxury, he cries, moral decay. Today, it is incense in the latrine. Tomorrow, marble thrones and minstrels playing the lyre as we squat. Another joins in. What of the cost? Shall we melt the silver from Jupiter's temple to perfume a sponge pit? The chamber simmers like a pot on a slow flame. Manius counters with dramatic logic. We perfume our temples. We scent the couches at our banquets. Will we honor the gods, but not ourselves? Historians still debate whether Manius was sincere or simply grandstanding, but traces of charred incense cups have been found in certain ancient latrine sites. So perhaps the idea wasn't so far-fetched after all. You can almost smell it. A cool, echoing chamber of polished stone. Shafts of dusty sunlight piercing the gloom, and there, at the far end, a bronze censer swinging gently, breathing out curls of fragrant smoke that mingle with, well, let's say reality. Yet incense is never just smell. It's symbol. For Manius, it was a way to gild the grime, to dress necessity in dignity. But to his rivals, it reeked of something worse than odor, softness. The creeping decadence that critics always feared would rot Rome from within. Do you think our ancestors needed incense to do their duty? one senator sneers. They conquered Gaul without scented latrines. By Mars, they relieved themselves in ditches and thanked the gods for it. Ah, the nostalgia card. It never fails. You can almost hear the applause of invisible ancestors echoing through the chamber. The debate flares, words clashing like swords in a forum duel. Incense advocates speak of public health, of masking stench to curb sickness, a point that carries weight, since disease often seeped from filth. Opponents retort that perfume hides, but does not cleanse. One even declares, better the honest stink of Rome than the false sweetness of Greece. A jab, as always, at those wily Greeks with their perfumed oils and dainty philosophies. By midday, tempers sag like overripe figs. Manius, still defiant, promises to pay for a trial run out of his own purse, a gesture that earns murmurs of admiration and suspicion in equal measure. Will it happen? Historians aren't sure, but the idea floats now, like incense smoke in the rafters of memory, that even in a world of legions and laurels, someone worried deeply about making bathrooms smell nice. Outside, Rome goes on, a tapestry of clattering carts, shouting vendors, flickering torches as dusk rolls in. Inside your mind, though, the image lingers. A marble chamber, cool and resonant, touched by the strange tenderness of a bronze censer swinging gently in the half-light. A place where power hummed low and whispers curled like smoke above the steady murmur of water. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes history so wonderfully human. The endless, absurd longing to make even the most basic acts just a little more beautiful. The incense debate still hangs in the air like a stubborn puff of frankincense, but Rome is never short on ideas or on senators eager to make their mark. The next morning, as the forum bustles under a pale wash of dawn light, the Senate gathers again. Oil lamps flicker against the marble walls, and the soft shuffle of sandals on polished stone echoes like distant rain. The new proposal isn't about fragrance. It's about something far more controversial, something that stabs at the very heart of Roman tradition. Should women have their own toilets? Yes, you heard that right. Rome, that sprawling empire of law and luxury, shared much, but not equally. Public latrines were communal spaces, overwhelmingly designed for men. Elite women often avoided them entirely, preferring private facilities in their domus. But now, whispers have grown louder. Some senators claim they've heard complaints from patrician matrons, murmurs of discomfort, even dishonor, at the thought of brushing sandals with strangers in shared spaces. And so, the debate begins. Senator Lucius Domitius rises first, his voice smooth as oil on water. Honored fathers, he intones, let us consider modesty. Our wives, our daughters, should they not enjoy the same dignity we seek for ourselves? His words drip with virtue, but you sense the political calculation behind them. Appease the matrons, and you curry favor with their powerful households. But before Lucius can bask in his imagined glory, up jumps Gaius Piso, brows knitted like a badly folded toga. Separate toilets? Are we Greeks now? His tone is sharp enough to carve the date into a wax tablet. Rome thrives on unity. We dine together, bathe together. Why splinter in the latrine? The chamber stirs. Some senators nod at Piso's thunder. Others tilt their heads, intrigued by Lucius's plea. A third voice, older, rasping like gravel, cuts through the murmurs. Have you considered the cost? It's always the cost. Separate spaces mean separate plumbing, extra marble benches, more water flow. The numbers bloom in the air like dark clouds over the Tiber. You picture the scene. Senators leaning forward, their rings glinting in the lamplight, calculating expenses even as they posture about morality. Rome, as ever, is a city of contradictions. Lavish in spectacle, thrifty in sanitation. Historians still debate how common mixed-gender facilities truly were. Some archaeological sites suggest occasional separation, but evidence is spotty, like water trickling through a cracked aqueduct. What's certain is that the debate reflects something deeper. Rome's obsession with order, colliding with the messy reality of human need. One senator, cheeks flushed, voice quivering with righteous zeal, blurts, "If we grant separate seats for women, what next? For slaves? For foreigners? For poets?" The chamber ripples with laughter, the kind that hides anxiety. Because beneath the humor lies a fear Rome rarely names aloud, the fear of change, of bending the rigid spine of tradition. And yet, you can almost hear another voice, softer, slyer. What harm in a little modesty? If it buys peace at home, is that not cheaper than war abroad? That voice belongs to Manius Acilius, the incense champion from yesterday, who seizes the floor with a flourish. Why not combine our efforts? Separate spaces for women, perfumed for their comfort, a triumph of Roman ingenuity. The reaction? Equal parts horror and hilarity. One senator mutters, "Next he'll want cushions on the benches." Another whispers, "And harpists in every corner." Still, Manius presses on, weaving pictures of scented privacy, of Rome shining as a beacon of refinement to the barbarian world. His words curl through the chamber like tendrils of imagined incense. But reality is harder than rhetoric. No budget, no marble, no appetite for architectural upheaval. Not when legions need pay and roads need mending. The motion falters, stumbles, and collapses like an overburdened donkey. For now, the benches stay as they are, long, cold, and unapologetically communal. Yet the thought lingers, faint as perfume in a drafty hall. Perhaps one day, privacy will matter. Perhaps one day, Rome will bow to the whispers of its women. But not today. Today, unity holds, awkward, smelly, and profoundly Roman. Outside, dusk drapes the city in rose and gold. Street vendors shout their last bargains, the scent of grilled fish curling through the alleys. Somewhere, a musician plucks a soft tune on a lyre, the notes mingling with the laughter of children chasing a hoop down the cobbles. And beneath it all, hidden in shadowed chambers, water flows endlessly, washing away the traces of debates as tangled and human as any Rome ever knew. You settle into that image, the empire at its height, arguing over benches while the world burns at its edges, and you feel something like peace, because history, in all its splendor and absurdity, is still just people trying to make life a little less uncomfortable. The senators file back into the chamber the next morning, looking more rumpled than regal. Sleeplessness, or maybe indigestion from last night's banquet, hangs over the room like a damp toga. Yet despite the fatigue, the debate refuses to die. In fact, it grows more ceremonial, because now someone has put ink to parchment. A young senator named Publius Cornelius, A man whose ambition gleams brighter than his sandals rises with a scroll clutched in his manicured hands. His cheeks glow pink with pride as he unrolls it and clears his throat. "Honored fathers," he announces, voice trembling with the drama of a street performer, "in response to yesterday's most noble deliberations, I present the etiquette scroll of necessary places." The chamber stills. A few jaws tighten, a few brows lift. And then, as if on cue, half the Senate groans in unison. You can almost hear the thought hanging in the incense-thick air. Not this again. But Publius presses on, eyes shining like polished bronze. He begins to read, Clause 1. Thou shalt not linger upon the bench beyond reasonable necessity, lest others suffer delay. A snort escapes from somewhere in the back. Publius ignores it. Clause 2. Thou shalt rinse thy sponge thoroughly in vinegar before returning it to communal use. The snort turns into a cough, possibly hiding a laugh. Clause 3. Thou shalt refrain from humming, whistling, or singing in tones above what decorum permits. At that, the chamber erupts like Vesuvius on a bad day. Laughter rolls across the floor, echoing off the marble walls. One senator clutches his belly, gasping, "By Hercules, shall we set the pitch for acceptable humming?" Another chimes in, "Perhaps a fine for off-key notes?" Publius turns crimson, but soldiers on. Clause 4. Conversation of a private or conspiratorial nature is discouraged in the latrine. The irony hits like a chariot wheel. Everyone knows the latrine is a whisper factory, a political forge where alliances spark and smolder. To ban secret talk here is like forbidding water in a bathhouse. Still, Publius keeps reading, his voice wobbling like a novice gladiator. Clause 5. Incense burners, if present, shall not be used to conceal contraband or messages. And there it is. The sly admission that incense might, just might, slip past the Senate as an indulgence. Manius Acilius, the perfumed crusader, sits up straighter, his lips curving in triumph. The scroll drones on. 10 full clauses, each more ridiculous than the last. Sponge-sharing protocols, seat spacing standards, even a recommendation for polite eye contact management. By the time Publius rolls up the parchment with a triumphant snap, the Senate is a sea of smirks and suppressed laughter. Historians are still debating whether this scroll was sincere or a brilliant piece of satire aimed at the Senate's fondness for overregulation. Some suspect Publius hoped to make a name for himself as the lawgiver of cleanliness. If so, he succeeded, though not in the way he intended. The magistrate calls for comments. Immediately, a grizzled veteran rises, toga rumpled like an unmade bed. "Young man," he rumbles, "I have fought Parthians, crossed mountains, buried friends, and yet never, in all my years, did I dream I'd hear the phrase, eye contact in the latrine, debated under this roof." The room shakes with laughter. Even the scribes grin, their wax tablets filling with words they know posterity will savor. But here's the twist. While the scroll sounds absurd, it reveals something profound. Rome believed in order everywhere. From the Senate floor to the sponge bucket, there was a craving for structure, for rules that made the messy business of life feel just a little less messy. You let the picture settle. Publius, pink-faced but proud, clutching his scroll like a general holding a battle standard. Around him, the Senate hums, a chorus of voices rising and falling, sharp as stylus strokes. Outside, the world rolls on. Chariots rumble over cobblestones. Bakers hawk bread warm from the oven. The scent of garum drifts on the breeze. And inside this cool marble hall, men argue about whether humming should carry a penalty. And somehow, that absurdity is comforting. Because history isn't all battles and blood. It's also this. People, earnest and foolish in equal measure, trying to turn chaos into order. Even when chaos smells faintly of vinegar, the laughter from Publius's Etiquette scroll still echoes faintly in the Senate chamber as another day dawns on Rome. Outside, the city roars to life, carts rumbling on cobblestones, hawkers crying out the day's bargains, the Tiber gleaming under a molten sunrise. Inside, however, the mood is lighter than it has been in days. The senators arrive draped in togas, some still chuckling about eye contact protocols, others humming softly just to provoke their more humorless colleagues. But the mirth doesn't last. Because word has spread, whispered through the forum, murmured in baths, even scratched on the walls of a particularly cheeky latrine. The emperor has heard about the debate. Yes, the emperor. The man whose face stares down from coins, whose name is etched into triumphal arches. And what does he think about the Senate squabbling over sponges, humming bands, and incense burners? You picture the scene. A messenger gliding into the chamber, sandals whispering across marble, carrying a scroll sealed with imperial wax. All conversation stops. Even the hum-happy senators freeze mid-note. The magistrate breaks the seal with the solemnity of a priest opening an oracle. The parchment unfurls. The voice reading it trembles slightly, whether from reverence or barely concealed glee. Who can say? The message is brief, almost unbearably so. To my most dignified Senate, may your benches remain orderly, your sponges ever clean, and your debates less fragrant than your ambitions. Veil. That's it. No decree, no command. Just a line dripping with imperial sarcasm. The kind of humor that could topple a lesser man's career if misread. The chamber erupts. Laughter booms like thunder under the vaulted ceiling. Senators clutch their bellies, their togas sliding dangerously askew. Even the scribes, stoic as statues through days of sponge rhetoric, double over, tears spotting their wax tablets. Historians still debate whether the emperor meant this as a gentle jest or a pointed rebuke. Was he amused at their fuss over latrines, or slyly reminding them that while Rome's enemies sharpened swords at the borders, its leaders sharpened tongues over sponge etiquette? Either way, the message becomes legend. Some senators take it in stride, chuckling and vowing to debate less fragrantly. Others bristle, their pride pricked like a sandal strap. Publius Cornelius, poor soul, sits frozen in crimson silence, clutching his etiquette scroll like a mother shielding her child from ridicule. But Manius Acilius, the perfumed visionary, seizes the moment with a grin as wide as the Appian Way. Rising with theatrical flair, he declares, "Honored fathers, the emperor has spoken with grace. Let us not disappoint him. Let us craft a code so refined, so dignified, that our descendants will praise us as the guardians of Roman purity." Cue the groans. Cue the sarcastic applause. Cue one senator muttering, "Next he'll propose marble benches inlaid with pearls." Another adds, "And perhaps a lyre player on every sponge duty." But beneath the laughter, something curious happens. The tension eases. For weeks, they've wrangled over curtains and incense, taxes and sponge audits. Now, the emperor's quip folds the absurdity into a kind of shared joke. For the first time, they laugh together, not at one another. And in that laughter, the Senate feels almost human. You let the scene unfurl in your mind. Marble columns, glowing in the soft torchlight, scrolls piled like sleepy serpents on wooden tables, oil lamps casting warm halos on walls etched with centuries of triumph. Outside, twilight slides across the city like a silk cloak. The air smells of wood smoke and bread, and faintly, the sweet bite of garum. And here, in this cavernous hall, where laws are forged and destinies sealed, men lounge like weary actors after a farce, chuckling over the emperor's jab. For a moment, the weight of empire lifts, and what remains is something small, absurd, and strangely tender. The knowledge that even the greatest power in the known world cannot stop being hilariously, irredeemably human. The Senate's laughter fades like incense smoke, but the scrolls remain, the ink still damp on the wax tablets. For all the emperor's teasing, Rome is not a city that forgets ideas once spoken aloud, especially not ideas that brush against dignity and order. And so, the question lingers. If sponges and benches stir such passions in the curia, how will they shape the life of ordinary Romans beyond these walls? Today's session begins under a sky the color of tarnished silver, the kind of morning that smells faintly of rain and olive groves. The senators trickle in, sandals whispering on marble, their voices low, their jokes softer now. The novelty of the debate has worn into something else, a resolve, perhaps, to settle the matter before it makes them the laughingstock of the Forum for Eternity. The magistrate calls the chamber to order. With a solemn flourish, he announces, "Honored fathers, today we vote." Ah, the drama of it. No more incense streams. No more sponge levies painted in patriotic hues. Just a simple tally, ink scratched on wax, that will decide whether Rome imposes a law on bathroom decorum or lets nature take its unruly course. But before the vote, the arguments flare one last time, bright as torches in the dusk. "Order is our glory," bellows Marcus Attilius, his voice echoing against the coffered ceiling. "Shall we conquer nations and yet fail to conquer chaos in our latrines?" His toga flares as he gestures grandly, as though invoking Jupiter himself. Across the aisle, Gaius Piso rises like an old oak bending in the wind, his tone dripping with scorn. "Order? Do you call this order? Scrolls about humming and sponges and incense pots? Rome does not tremble because a man whistles in a privy. Rome trembles when men forget the difference between law and lunacy." The chamber hums with energy, like a lyre string drawn too tight. Scribes scratch furiously, their styluses cutting lines that will echo through centuries of dusty archives. Then Manius Acilius seizes the floor. Ah, Manius, the dreamer of scented latrines, the poet of perfumed benches. His voice, smooth as warm honey, curls through the hall. "Honored fathers, let us not forget. This is not about sponges or incense. This is about Rome, about who we are. If we leave the necessary places to disorder, what message do we send? That Rome, master of the world, cannot master its own necessities?" A low murmur ripples like wind through wheat. Manius lifts his chin, basking in the weight of his own rhetoric. For a heartbeat, you almost believe him. Almost. And then, blessedly, The magistrate calls the question. The motion before us, to adopt a code of decorum for public latrines, with clauses as read by Senator Publius Cornelius, amended to remove excessive flourishes, a pause for laughter that ripples like a lazy stream. The voting begins. Senators rise one by one, their voices steady, their sandals thudding softly on stone as they return to their seats. You imagine the tension crackling like static on a woolen cloak, and then, done. The magistrate clears his throat, eyes flicking to the tally scratched on wax. His voice, calm and crisp, cuts through the hush. The motion passes by a narrow margin. Ah, Rome, capable of deciding the fate of provinces with a shrug, yet splitting hairs over bathroom conduct like philosophers over wine cups. And yet, there it is, a law, a fragile scroll that will try to tame the unruliest of human moments. Historians are still debating how far this law truly reached. Was it enforced with zeal, or quietly shelved, a curiosity in some archive, while life in the latrines flowed as freely as ever? We cannot know for certain. But the fact that the Senate voted at all tells you something profound. Rome believed nothing was beneath legislation, not even the soft hum of a tune in an echoing chamber. Outside, the clouds loosen their grip on the sky, and rain begins to fall, soft, silvery, washing the marble streets clean. The senators drift into the mist, their togas snapping like sails in the wind, their voices fading into the hush of rain. Perhaps they feel a little grander, knowing they have preserved Rome's dignity. Or perhaps they're just wondering what's for lunch. And you, reclining in the quiet of your room, can almost see them. Marble columns blurred by rain, the faint smell of wet stone mingling with the sharp bite of vinegar from some distant trough. The empire breathes, immense and absurd, its greatness built not only on legions and laws, but on the endless, tender human wish to make life neater, cleaner, even where the world least notices. The law is passed, the scroll sealed, the wax still soft beneath the magistrate's stamp, and with that, the Senate disperses, their sandals whispering across marble like the tide ebbing from a shore. But here's the real question, the one no scribe bothered to scratch into wax. Did anything actually change? Step with me now, beyond the curia's cold splendor, out into the steam and clamor of the Roman streets. Picture the Via Sacra under a sky the color of bronze coin, the air thick with the mingled scents of olive oil, baking bread, and the less poetic tang of donkey dung. Merchants bawl about fresh figs. Street performers juggle knives for clinking coins. A mule snorts as it shoulders through a knot of toga-clad men deep in gossip. And there, tucked between the shadowed arches of an insula, lies the real stage for this senatorial comedy, the public latrine. You step inside. The cool breath of stone greets you, carrying a perfume equal parts vinegar and inevitability. The chamber hums with voices, echoes bouncing off marble like playful spirits. Rows of benches stretch along the walls, each punctured with neat circular holes polished smooth by centuries of use. Below, the water gurgles in its endless journey toward the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's mighty sewer, the empire's secret river of filth and fortune. Has the new code of decorum reached this place? You listen. A young man hums, a tune plucked from last night's theater, and immediately a gray-haired fellow taps his sandal against the stone. "Clause 3, he barks, his tone dripping with triumph. The hummer rolls his eyes, but the melody dies. A victory for order, however small. Near the vinegar trough, two men squabble over a sponge, voices rising like gulls on a windy pier. "Clause 2, cries one, waving his hand as though summoning a magistrate from the shadows. A few chuckles drift through the chamber, but no one intervenes. The sponge, as ever, remains a sticky point of contention. Historians are still debating whether these laws were enforced with any vigor, or whether they existed mainly as a senatorial inside joke. In truth, Rome thrived on contradictions. Marble grandeur masking muddy streets, eloquent laws crumbling in the face of daily chaos. And oh, the gossip that swirls in this echoing hall. Men lean close, their voices dropping to the hush of conspirators. "Did you hear? The governor of Hispania caught siphoning funds from the roadworks." Another whispers of a scandal involving a matron and a poet, their trysts inked in verses passed hand to hand like contraband figs. The latrine remains what it has always been, a theater of whispers, a marketplace of secrets. No clause, however finely worded, can silence ambition in a space where men sit stripped of pomp, sandals dangling, dignity puddled at their feet. You linger, listening to the music of Rome's humblest hub, the soft splash of water, the creak of sandals, the sigh of a man easing onto stone, the rise and fall of voices weaving politics with petty complaint. It's strangely soothing, like the lull of a fountain. Life reduced to its simplest rhythms. Flow, rinse, repeat, and then, just as you're drifting on that sound, a familiar note returns, a hum, low and defiant. The same young man as before, lips curled in a grin, tapping his foot against the bench in perfect sync with his tune. The graybeard glares, muttering about barbarism and the fall of Rome. The young one winks, his voice barely above a whisper. Some laws are meant for the archives. You smile in the darkness because you know he's right. Rome can legislate sponges and humming, incense and eye contact. But human nature always wriggles through the cracks, like water seeping into stone. That's what makes this story so tender, so absurd, so achingly familiar. Because deep down, you've seen this scene before. In modern boardrooms, in family kitchens, in every place people argue about things that matter only because they matter to us. As you picture the latrine fading into shadow, the water murmuring on its endless journey, you feel the hush of history pressing close. Not the clang of swords, not the roar of triumph, but the soft, ridiculous heartbeat of ordinary life. Night has draped its velvet cloak over Rome. The streets glitter faintly with oil lamps, their flames dancing in iron cages like restless spirits. From the Palatine Hill, the city sprawls in quiet splendor, its marble temples glowing pale as bones under the moon. The Forum lies hushed now, its chatter stilled, its echoes folded into the darkness like secrets tucked into a scroll. But somewhere, deep in the heart of the city, the law of latrine decorum slumbers too, etched on a fragile scroll. nestled in an archive that smells of dust and beeswax. It rests between decrees of war and edicts of grain, a featherweight amid the iron of empire, a law born not of blood and ambition, but of vinegar and whispered complaints. And yet, the city moves on. Senators return to their villas, their sandals crunching softly on gravel paths, lined with laurel and marble busts. You imagine them dining by lamplight, their tables crowded with silver platters of figs and honey cakes, their voices weaving stories of triumph and satire. Perhaps someone raises a goblet and says with a grin, "To Manius, Lord of Incense." Laughter blooms, rich and warm as Falernian wine. Meanwhile, in the dim glow of a public latrine, life hums on exactly as before. Men enter with a flick of the toga, their faces shadowed and weary from the day's debates. They settle onto cold stone, sandals swinging lazily, voices curling like smoke in the damp air. Someone mutters about grain prices. Another gripes about gladiator games. A third, bolder than most, hums a tune, a lilting scrap of melody that dances along the marble vault. No one quotes Clause 3. No one waves the code like a sword. The law exists, but only in ink. Here, flesh prevails over parchment. The sponge still floats in its vinegar bath, weary and resigned to its fate. The incense burners never came, save for the faint scent of olive oil clinging to the lamps. The benches remain bare, the chatter unchecked, the laughter too loud for any code to muzzle. And you realize something as you drift deeper into this picture. This law, like so many laws, was never really about toilets. It was about control, about that eternal Roman hunger to press order into every crack of chaos, to script civility into spaces where nature writes its own wild lines. But nature, sly and stubborn, always wins. It laughs at scrolls. It hums in forbidden tunes. It shares sponges with a wink and a shrug. Historians still debate whether this law was enforced, but maybe that doesn't matter. Its true legacy is a whisper, soft, ridiculous, strangely sweet, that echoes down the centuries. Even the mighty Rome, that empire of marble and iron, had meetings about bathroom manners. Now, as you recline in the quiet dark, imagine this: the Senate chamber empty, its columns draped in shadow. The moon slants through a high window, silver pooling on the floor where once sandals slapped and togas flared. The scroll of latrine law slumbers on its shelf, its ink fading, its words forgotten by all but a handful of scribes. And outside, the Tiber flows under the stars, whispering to itself, carrying secrets and sewage alike into the infinite night. Breathe slowly. Let the weight of the marble fade. The voices soften to murmurs. The laughter dissolve into stillness. The empire sleeps now, its restless heart lulled by the hush of water in darkened pipes. And you, yes, you, can sleep too. Because if Rome, with all its clamor and chaos, could pause to debate the etiquette of sponges, then maybe the world is not so harsh after all. Close your eyes. Drift on the gentle current of history, where battles blur and only the smallest, strangest truths remain. Good night, traveler. Good night, Rome. May your benches be orderly, your sponges ever clean, and your dreams fragrant with laughter. Now, let the marble fade. Let the voices of senators soften into whispers, dissolving like smoke in a warm breeze. Picture Rome at rest beneath a moonlit sky, the aqueducts gleaming like silver ribbons, the temples shimmering pale against the darkness, the streets hushed except for the distant murmur of the Tiber flowing through its ancient veins. Feel the weight of the day slip from your shoulders, as if you've set down a scroll too heavy with rules that never really mattered. Breathe in the cool night air of history, scented faintly with olive oil and wet stone. Hear the hush of sandals on marble fade into silence. Listen as the echoes of laughter dissolve, leaving only the slow, soothing rhythm of water trickling through unseen pipes. In this quiet hour, the empire sleeps. No more debates, no more votes, no arguments about sponges or humming in tiled chambers. The city curls into its vast and tender slumber, and so can you. You are safe here, wrapped in the calm of centuries past, where nothing urgent stirs, only the soft heartbeat of time itself, steady and eternal. So close your eyes. Let the darkness cradle you like a velvet cloak. Drift along the river of memory, where even Rome's grandeur becomes a gentle hum, a lullaby whispered in stone and shadow. The marble benches, the glowing lamps, the laughter and the incense, all of it fades now, floating away like petals on a quiet stream. And as you surrender to sleep, remember this: even the greatest empires argued about the smallest things. That truth is your comfort, your smile in the dark. Because if Rome could laugh at itself, so can you. Good night. Sleep deeply. Dream of marble halls under starlight, and let history hold you close.